And it's staying very linear because you've got this intense magnetic field on both sides. That Mylar is the Neodymium's bitch. And the net result of that is you kind of get to have your cake and eat it too. Greetings and welcome to Sound with David Hyman. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a speaker that exceeds all expectations of what a speaker should do in 2026. This is the Alsyvox Caravaggio, designed by a guy named Daniele Coen. He's an Italian aerospace engineer making these in Valencia, Spain. As you can see, this doesn't look like a normal speaker, okay? There's no woofers, traditional woofers, there's no tweeters. If you come around the side, come with me, my friend, you'll notice these are about 6.5 feet tall, but they're only 1.5 inches thick. So what you've got here is a different kind of speaker. This is a Quasi-Ribbon speaker with a planar magnetic woofer, okay? Let me explain in more detail. So, historically, you've got a speaker in an enclosure with a woofer and a tweeter, right? This is the stuff that you know about. Maybe you've got a mid-range, maybe you've got a horn driver. In a speaker like this, what you've got happening, and let me show you, is you've essentially got 4 drivers on this one. This is a 4-way, it's very advanced. And it should be for $250,000, okay? But you've got a woofer panel here, you've got a mid-range, a tweeter, and a super tweeter, okay? The woofer, it's going to about 500 hertz, where the mid-range kicks in. The way these things work is you've got a thin piece of Mylar, 40 microns thick. That's about 1,000th of an inch, okay? This thin piece of Mylar has an aluminum substrate. There's a vapor deposit, or they've etched in some aluminum to carry the current from your amplifier, okay? And so what you've got is this large strip of Mylar. On the woofer, that Mylar is tensioned and held on the top and the bottom and the sides. The fact that it's held on all 4 sides is what makes the woofer planar magnetic. Now, in the mid-range and the tweeter, that Mylar is only held and tensioned on the top and the bottom. So for the mid-range tweeter, super tweeter, those are considered true ribbons because they're only held on the top and the bottom. Now that really thin piece of Mylar sits between, pardon my language, in this model, a shitload of magnets. There's over 1,000 neodymium magnets in this speaker. So even though it's only about 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick, these things weigh about 350 pounds each. Trying to move these things is a 4 human being operation. And so when you've got a driver that's essentially 1,000th of an inch thick, its acoustic impedance with air is like negligible. It essentially is air. It's so light, it's so fast that it can move at the speed of sound. With traditional drivers, you've got delay. It can't react fast enough to the music. So you've got this delay, which is essentially a form of distortion called temporal smearing. In a driver like this, it's as fast as the music. Now, the way you get output out of these things, you need to push a volume of air. When you have that much surface area moving a little bit, it can move as much air as a smaller traditional woofer, unlike previous speakers of this design before it. This wasn't the first ribbon or the first planar magnetic speaker. They go back to, the 70s. There were brands like Magnepan, Apogee, Analysis Audio. Whole bunch of people have been doing stuff like this for 40 years. But historically, they didn't get the dynamics that Daniele Coen has figured out how to get out of this driver. And the way he gets the dynamics out of the driver is that Mylar is surrounded by these neodymium magnets on both sides of the Mylar. Apogee, Magnepan, they had ceramic magnets. They didn't have a lot of power. They were only on one side of the Mylar. Now you've got 1,000 neodymium magnets in this thing on both sides of that Mylar driver. The Mylar driver on this woofer can move 20 millimeters. That's 10x what used to happen in a Magnepan or an Apogee. And it's staying very linear because you've got this intense magnetic field on both sides. That Mylar is the neodymium's bitch. And the net result of that is you kind of get to have your cake and eat it too. You get the speed and the transparency of a ribbon or a planar magnetic, but you get the drive and the dynamics of a traditional driver. And that's the magic. Not only that, with that much magnetic power, these things are 94 dB sensitivity. Daniel, the designer of them, powers them with an 11-watt triode. What I've got here is a little more powerful. This is an 80-watt triode from Nat Audio. First of all, I'll say the speaker obviously doesn't have an enclosure, okay? It's what's called a dipole. It's radiating the sound in both directions, front and back. Now, in a traditional dynamic speaker, when you have an enclosure, that enclosure is vibrating. And that vibration is distortion. And what all enclosure manufacturers are trying to do is keep that box from making noise. And you can measure that noise with an accelerometer on the side of the cabinet to see where the frequency is in which that cabinet is vibrating. And it's the bane of every speaker designer's existence who's designing with cabinets, is keeping that cabinet from making noise. There's a few different schools of thought and philosophies of how to keep an enclosure quiet. One is making it incredibly inert. So you've got manufacturers like Magico using aluminum and Stenheim. You've got companies like Rockport using resins. You've got companies like Wilson Benesch using carbon fiber. And then you've got companies like Harbeth, which just let the whole thing vibrate. And they try to keep it vibrating equally across the frequency spectrum. So in a sense, that cabinet is a design element as a part of the speaker, and the whole thing is vibrating, hopefully sympathetically with each other and not asympathetically. The beautiful thing about a dipole or a planar magnetic is there is no cabinet to vibrate. So you don't have to worry about any of the distortion that comes with a cabinet. The downside is a speaker like this is way more reactive to what's behind it. They need a lot more space. You're going to need a solid 6 to 9 feet behind the speaker. And so if you have a living room that's not a dedicated listening room, or maybe you have a significant other that doesn't want something like this a third of the way into your living room, you might be better off with an enclosed speaker. The other downside of an open dipole like this is when you've got sound radiating out of both sides, what you're going to get along the edges is some cancellation. It's almost like noise cancellation. When two of the same wave hit each other, they cancel each other out. So in a sense, you're going to get a dip in the frequency response, which is called comb filtering. And that's an inherent flaw in a dipole like this. And so all these different things are about weighing advantages and disadvantages. Everything has advantages. Everything has disadvantages. We're all different. What do you want to live with? For me, this is the gold standard. So let's talk about the crossover now. A traditional speaker enclosure, you've got a crossover inside the cabinet, which is taking the signal from your amplifier and splitting that up to figure out which part of the frequency spectrum is going to the tweeter, mid-range, and woofer. Because there's no cabinet, there's no place to put the crossover, so you've got to put it in a separate box here on the bottom. So let's take a look at this. This is the crossover for the Alsyvox. Okay, you've got the speaker cable coming in to this crossover, and then you've got these jumper cables. One's going for the woofer, one's going for the mid-range, one's going for the tweeter, One's going for the super tweeter. And the mid-range tweeter and super tweeter do give you some room for adjustment. If you want to do a little equalization and you're not getting the exact sound you want, you can do plus or minus a few dBs in each direction for each driver. So I talked you through how these things work in principle. Now I want to talk to you about how they sound and why I chose them as part of my reference system. I've been obsessed with this hobby since I'm 13 years old. I've been iterating and working towards the quote unquote absolute sound for 45, 50 years. And I was in the Munich audio show 3 years ago, the world's biggest audio show, which has the best audio equipment in the world, where I go every year, like Mecca. And so 3 years ago, I walk into this room, I hear these speakers. Actually, it was the model above. It was the Raphael. And I was just blown away. It was the kind of thing where you walk in and you go, why does this sound so fundamentally different than everything else I'm hearing at the show? Like there was some mind trick that something was real or felt real inside this room relative to everything else. So I spent a good amount of time in this room. And I'm looking at the people around me and we're all like, what the fuck? So, I did my own A/B testing for the next 3 days. I listened to those speakers, then I went into the Magico room. I listened to those speakers, then I went into the Stenheim room. I listened to those speakers, I went into the Wilson room. I went into the Martin room, and I kept going back and forth. And for me, we're all different. For me and what I'm after, this was the best speaker. And so now that I've lived with them for a few years, and I just went to the high-end audio show in Vienna a few weeks ago, I still feel the same way. Now when I go, I really don't hear anything I like better. I hear things that sound different and really great, but I don't hear anything that I would rather own. And so what these speakers do for me is as close to Aural, A-U-R, Aural virtual reality as you can get. When I put them on, I am transported. I'm listening to recent live David Crosby of Genevieve, and the walls in here just melt and disappear. I am at the venue, and there's something about these speakers and all that surface area and all that resolution that is transporting. When I hear it, my mind just floats away. When I hear these speakers, I can stay at the razor's edge of the present, right? Something that we're all after. Everyone talks about mindful meditation now. It's a big word. Mindful meditation. Mindful meditation is done with doing something in the present, looking at something, not just your breath, but something around you. And when you're listening to these speakers and you're transported, you're not future tripping. You're not thinking about the past. You're focusing on the now. And so they do it for me. I mean, the speed in which they react, the dynamics, the microdynamics, and the macrodynamics all working together. With traditional drivers, of which I've had so many, there's always this discontinuity, especially when the drivers are not made of the same material. There's a discontinuity and there's a difference in the speed in which those drivers are moving. And, we're hunter-gatherers. There's nothing we care as humans more about than phase anomalies. When the timing is off, when the timing is off, the illusion falls apart. And so when you've got all of these drivers made of the same material, working at the same speed, you don't get that discontinuity. It is an explosion of all of the drivers moving perfectly together in synchronicity. And you can tell, the drivers just disappear. The instruments are floating in a three-dimensional space in here. And it's quite something. So another thing I love about this model in the range is the Botticelli and the smaller one below it, they don't have the dedicated mid-range driver. And to have that much surface area for a mid-range, where the primary stuff we listen to and care about lives, the vocals, are all in the mid-range, to have that much surface area for a mid-range with a ribbon driver is spectacular. I mean, I've never heard mid-range like I do with these speakers on any other speaker system. Now let's talk about the bass. Planar bass, to me, is the dream. You know, when I was young and I couldn't afford bigger speakers, I always went for a pure tweeter and mid-range because I knew I couldn't afford clean bass. And essentially for 40 years, I've been chasing and working hard so I can be able to afford a speaker that has that clean mid-range tweeter and clean bass. And as I got more money, I got a bigger pair of speakers that could not just do the upper frequencies well, but do the bottom. There's really laws of diminishing returns here, and getting the bass right is really what the chase is ultimately about. You can get a really good mid-range and tweeter for not a lot of money. Getting that bass deep, tight, and seamless with the rest is I think ultimately what we're chasing after as we move up the flagpole into upper echelon of speakers. And so I've been chasing clean bass forever. I've had every kind of subwoofer you can imagine. I've had the fastest Wilson Benesch Taurus subs, never fast enough. I've had the fastest traditional dynamic drivers, carbon fiber drivers, not fast enough. When you have this much surface area, 40 microns thick, moving at this speed, you just have never heard faster, cleaner, tighter bass. And so the result of that, the whole thing comes out as one whole beautiful picture that's propagating in your direction as you're listening. So I'm going to talk to you right now through my existing reference system. We'll start with the source, okay? Over here, we've got a relatively inexpensive streamer. It's the T8, only costs $1,000. And I know, you know, with $300,000 worth of equipment here, you might think I'm insane to have a $1,000 streamer. I did have a Tyco Extreme here for a while, $35,000 streamer. I think streamers are important, but not as important as a lot of the other components. So I decided to take the money and put it into other parts of my system that made a bigger difference, okay? The thing I love about that streamer for $1,000, it's got a linear power supply. It's got what's called SFP inputs and outputs, okay? So with the SFP input, I am able to go from the Ethernet and completely convert it to optical before it goes into my streamer. So there's complete galvanic isolation. You're not getting any noise coming across that line from the electrical power into the streamer. And keeping that high frequency noise out is extremely important. I've also got SFP coming out of that from a converter into my MSB reference digital to analog converter. From the MSB ladder DAC reference DA converter, we're going straight into the NAT Audio transmitter Evo monoblock amplifiers, 80 watt direct coupled triodes, no capacitor in the signal path, okay? We're going from there into the 4 ohm load of the Alsyvox Caravaggio speaker. Now, one thing I love about the full signal path here is this MSB reference is quite incredible for a few reasons. It's sending 12 volts into the ladder DAC, okay, a series of resistors. This is not doing digital to analog conversion with a chip. It's doing it with a series of gates made of resistors called a ladder DAC, okay? Advantages and disadvantages to a ladder DAC. We can talk about that in a separate video. I personally believe there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. I don't have dogma. All I care about is what sounds best. The ladder DAC in this unit outputs a full 12 volts coming out of the ladder. The way they do that is they've got quad ladders operating in parallel, so you can get that massive full 12 volts coming right out of the ladder. The beautiful thing about that is there's no gain stage in this digital to analog converter after the conversion happens. I don't know another DAC in the world that has no gain stage. That means there's no transistors, there's no capacitors in the signal path. You're basically hearing the sound right out of the ladder, okay? And so what the MSB has is attenuation. It'll lower off that maximum 12 volts, okay? But there's no gain stage. More gain stage, more electronics just means signal degradation. It's more things to make it sound shitty. It's more distortion. Less is more. Less is more, okay? So it's coming out of that MSB DAC, going into this NAT audio single-ended triode. There are not many triodes in the world that can put out 80 watts, okay? You've got amplifiers from companies like Wavac with the 833 tube that were able to put out massive power. You need a really amazing, highly regulated power supply to make this work. But the beautiful thing about one tube versus multiple tubes or multiple transistors is you don't get what's called crossover distortion. You're not getting those timing variants from multiple amplification devices trying to work in parallel. It's just one. So you don't have to worry about that. This is primarily putting out second order harmonic distortion, a distortion that's very benign, something that we don't mind hearing. And so to get that much purity straight into the Alsyvox with no cabinet distortion, you've really got two tubes in the whole signal path with nothing else. You've got the driver tube and you've got the massive Philips transmitter tube. And yeah, I'm quite happy. You'll notice I have a lot of records here, but I don't have a turntable. I'm in between turntables right now. I made some changes. I put money into the DAC. I've got attention deficit disorder. I have a hard time taking records out and playing a whole record. I used to love the ritual of it. Now I just like to play tracks. I'm sure I'll go back soon. I'm thinking about it. Bear with me, okay? Shit, well, I also forgot to tell you where the whole thing starts. I've got the Sound Application TT7 power conditioner, this little guy back there. I think it costs about $23,000, $24,000. The guy who designs that thing is an absolute genius. It's essentially a giant low-pass filter that's taking all of the noise out of the power supply. No one does low-pass filtration conditioners better than Sound Application. They are the gold standard. Don't tell me about your Shunyata. Don't tell me about your other brands. I've had every power isolation transformer, Taurus, I've had it all. This is non-current limiting. You don't have to worry. It's taking the full power out from the wall. And you put this thing in and the system sounds so different that once you have it in, you literally cannot live without it.